Hello and welcome again to Chile Talk. I'm Neil Davidson. I'm with Pete Lee. We hope at some point to interview other guests, incidentally. Just starting to come out of lockdown. We don't really have the technological nous to do it remotely, so we hope to do it face-to-face in the not-too-distant future.
We have turned our phones off for this particular film.
Yeah, that's right. We're getting better at this. Today's topic is censorship, self-censorship, also a bit of propaganda I think we're going to throw in, aren't we?
Yes, we can discuss all lines.
Of manipulation of information. So perhaps you'd like to give us a bit of a historical overview, Pete. I mean, obviously everybody knows that Chile had a big dictatorship.
Yes.
Where there was clearly a lot of censorship.
Yes, and that was not necessarily exceptional. I mean, Chile's always had some control of information, of massively available information. In the colonial period, there was no printing press. There was a couple of printing presses in Lima, but there was none in Chile. Immediately upon independence, a printing press was brought out and heavily used to disseminate information, encourage reading. At the same time, to control the information, and at various points in time, liberal sentiments, for example, have been suppressed by the means of controlling printing presses and such.
I see.
As in many countries, most of the broadcast media have traditionally been associated with different employer groups, the church, the state to some extent, different owners with different editorial positions, the same as everywhere really, but perhaps more so. And media is used to put across certain points of view, harmonise public opinion, manage public opinion.
Right, and then of course there have been episodes of authoritarian government, obviously the Pinochet years. You've spoken about the Ibanez government and
yes, another military government.
And even democratic governments, sorry.
Yes. Well, it must be said, Carlos Ibanez was such a successful dictator that he was actually elected
afterwards.
Some 20 years afterwards, yes.
So I suppose that was Pinochet's dream, because Pinochet also hoped, didn't he, by holding his referendum, to get popular approval, to be another Ibanez, to be that dictator who was so loved that he would actually be voted into office.
Yes.
But it didn't work out for him. But anyway, that's another topic. And even in periods of more democratic governance, for example, President González Videla banned the Communist Party, didn't he?
Yes. He was a radical politician, so considered on the centre-left, I guess, of the time.
That's right. So you know, you've often had to tread carefully in Chile when expressing views, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, of course, Pinochet is associated with this phrase that's kind of curious to me, that no leaf shall move without my seeing it.
Without my knowledge, that's right. No leaf moves in this country without.
Yes.
Without
is that a leaf from a tree or a leaf from a book?
Well, that's right. You said to me before that you always took it to be a page in a book.
Yes.
And I assumed you meant a leaf on a tree. It seemed the most obvious image. But possibly, Pete, you know Chile better than I do, and with this kind of rather Latin American idea that kind of nothing has actually really happened unless there's an official record of it.
Yes.
Perhaps he meant the leaf in some kind of great book of accounts, you know,
yes.
in which the acts of his enemies are kind of noted down. I took it to mean the leaf of a leaf on a tree. Anyway, we'll let the viewers decide which is more likely.
Yes, but one thing that came out of the long Pinochet dictatorship was, I think, a tendency for self-censorship, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think this always happens, of course, in dictatorships. You've got to be very careful what you say unless you know you're among friends, and how can you be sure it's safer to not say it. I think we're seeing something a bit similar now starting to happen in English-speaking countries, but not in relation to these classical political things, but in relation to things like race and gender. You've got to be very, very careful what you say in public.
You don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and I think we're more open about that than we've ever been, which is nice.
And at the same time, so many things seem to hurt people's feelings that it all seems safer to kind of say nothing.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation.
That's right. But obviously, the stakes are far higher in a dictatorship when you can actually cast it off and imprisoned and tortured. And this mentality hung on Chile for quite a long time after the dictatorship. It was very noticeable to me because I came here in '95, and to me, as an outside observer, a lot of Chileans feared there could easily be another military coup.
Well, Pinochet was still
the head of the armed forces. He was a senator for life. There were a number. There'd been a pretty smooth transition from dictatorship to democracy, in which the old institutions basically just changed a bit. To me, as an outside observer, it seemed kind of absurd to think of another military coup because there was just what possible pretext could there be for it at that point?
Well, so without the Cold War, hard to justify probably.
That's right. But, to a Chilean who had this visceral experience of dictatorship, it was a looming threat, and people were still careful what they said. And I didn't really notice this too much until in 1998, Pinochet was arrested in London, in England, and tried for human rights violations. And at that time, a satirical magazine was launched here in Chile called The Clinic, in English, The Clinic, named after the London clinic where Pinochet was being treated when he was arrested.
It's a rather eccentric move going to a London, probably a Harley Street clinic, to be treated.
I just think he was exposing himself, but there just wasn't any precedent for an ex-head of state being arrested, I don't think, in that fashion.
Well, the Chilean tradition has always been to go to Switzerland, where you certainly will not be arrested for your medical treatment.
That's right. That's right. Though even Switzerland, your bank account isn't as safe as it used to be,
Yes.
That's right.
But in the middle of London, a former dictator such as Pinochet was guaranteed to attract attention, I think.
That's right.
Notwithstanding his friendship with Margaret Thatcher.
But that's it. He felt he had friends. Nobody had ever, no ex-dictator had ever been arrested. There was a kind of unwritten rule, wasn't there? I mean, more or less supported by international law, though it was obviously unclear, which is why it was possible to launch prosecution. But there was a kind of, sort of code of brotherhood. I'm an ex-dictator, you're an ex-democratically elected prime minister, but perhaps we'd all better be a bit careful here. We don't just set nasty precedents because who knows who's going to be for the drop next.
And now he's the most famous dictator of them all. He's probably the only one that Guardian readers would know of, I would say.
Well, I think that's because Allende...
In South America. Yeah.
I think because Allende was so much the great hope for international democratic socialism that sort of Pinochet inherited Allende's fame. It's like, you got your Christ and your Antichrist, and the Antichrist is famous because of Christ, essentially. So Pinochet, by destroying Allende, rather as one hears in certain kind of primitive societies, you eat your enemy's liver, whatever, and you inherit his strength, or in this case his fame.
Oh, that's the Battle of Tucapel, I think. Yes.
That's right. Anyway, so Pinochet, when this magazine was launched called The Clinic, which is similar more or less to Private Eye, something like that, came on very strongly, mocking Pinochet, mocking the record of the dictatorship. And people were quite astonished and even appalled. We happened to know one of the people who had founded it, Patricia Fernandez, and my Chilean mother-in-law, was absolutely convinced that Fernandez was going to be picked up off the street in an unmarked car by a group of men in plain clothes, taken to a basement, and then horrible things were going to happen to him. Of course, nothing of the sort was ever going to happen. The secret police had been long disbanded. It was perfectly safe, but it was just this visceral fear of speaking your mind, and especially of being rude to people, these frightening figures wearing Prussian field grey, who were the men of the dictatorship.
Yes. Yes, a considerable fear. And the clinic also has a fair amount of sort of anti-clerical humour.
That's right. They cast their net reasonably widely,
which was quite novel, I think, at the time.
That's right, because, and they've always had that, but of course that's become a huge thing now. Has been the role of Catholic priests in child abuse.
Yes.
Which is still a very delicate subject, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and one example of, I don't know if you'd say it's self-censorship or it's simple fear of litigation, I can think of is from one of the 2 Chilean films that I've seen in my preparation on all things Chilean. The other one is Machuca.
You're in safe hands. You're in the hands of the experts here.
Yes. Machuca is a film made by a Cuico, an upper-class
upper middle class Chilean,
Andres Wood, about how liberal his family and social circle were at the time of the military coup in 1973. But the other film that I've seen is called El Bosque de Caredima. El
Bosque means the wood or the forest. But it's also the name of a well-to-do little area.
Yes. There's a poor bosque and a rich one in Santiago, and the rich one is based around a church. I've actually been to a christening at that church.
That's right. El Bosque is just the name of the street. There's a commune called El Bosque, and there's over there where the poor people live, and there's a street called El Bosque which is wealthy.
Yes.
With a fairly modern Catholic church in it.
Yes, and certainly throughout the 1980s, it had a very charismatic priest called Fernando Caradima, a descendant of Levantine Arabs. Like many Levantine Arabs sent their sons into the church as soon as they could afford it, as wealthy Chilean families have always done.
That's right, because there was a big immigration, Arab immigration into Chile, but it was mainly Christian.
Mainly Christian. They were originally often Maronites or Western Catholics, but they would generally convert to Roman Catholicism and Western or Eastern Catholics. They're Eastern Catholics. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
And in any case, Caradima was a very charismatic priest. The actor who plays him in this film is actually the actor who played the David Brent character in the Chilean version of The Office, which wasn't very successful, but...
So you do at least watch television here?
No, I only read about him on Wikipedia.
Oh, right.
He's a very good actor.
We remain faithful to the written and spoken word on the show, don't we?
Yes. Yep. In this case, no, I've read a few things about him. He's a very interesting character, really good actor, really good character actor, and he gets across the charisma of this abuser priest. Yeah. And Caradima had a preference for attractive men, whitish Chilean men,
teenage,
young men,
children,
not children, young men, often searching for their spiritual guidance and so on. And the film covered that quite well. I thought certainly the acting was very good, and covered the abuse that the priest was able to do, and to some extent the cover up within the local church hierarchy.
So no holes, not too many holes barred.
Didn't seem to be too many holes barred, except for one factor: the portrayal always off screen, of the Vatican investigation team into matters of abuse, as much financial irregularities as sexual abuse. Was very, very careful, almost as if the producers of the film were afraid of litigation or had been told not to go there. So the church investigators from the Vatican were always presented as fair-minded arbiters trying to get to the bottom of the truth, which is the official account of how the different scandals are resolved.
Got it. Whereas, I mean, I don't know about this particular committee. I'm not an expert, but I read a book written by a Chilean writer-journalist called Oscar Contador.
He's written a lot of very interesting books.
Social histories and
Social
stuff like
histories, yes.
And he wrote one about the paedophile scandal in the Catholic Church in Chile. And I remember that one of the priests he spoke to, an ex-priest, had been abused as a child, had become a priest himself, and had spent some time in Rome. And Contado asked him, so how does the situation of child abuse compare in Rome to Chile? And this man said, it's a whole different level. You know, bad as it might be in Chile, in Rome it was a whole different level. So, you know, it seems that the Vatican is not as pure as a driven snow.
Well, yes, and I think it's an interesting situation because, of course, after the extremely popular Pope John Paul II, despite the fact that he was often covering up many of these abuses, we had this God's Rottweiler, Benedict the 16th?
Oh God, I think so. Anyway,
16th?
You know.
Who's my favourite Pope, by the way. I like him, and he took a lot of flack. He was seen as being the unpopular Pope during dark times. And then, after a few years of Benedict, we got Francis, the first Latin American Pope, an Argentine, very good people skills, very good soft skills. And the strategy, the official sort of media strategy appears to be that the Vatican and the Church itself is full of goodness, despite the fact that many human failings have taken place
outside it, or within. That's right.
Yes.
In places under its control, but not within it.
Yes, and the film El Bosque de Carolina, a very good film. I thought it was somewhat blighted by this particular treatment, and I did feel that there was some sense of censorship or fear of litigation at play.
Yeah, interesting. Well, you know, and it is still a hugely sensitive topic here. I mean, people, especially a lot of wealthy people, you know, surprisingly have a visceral love for the Catholic Church. That to hear it affronted and criticised is extremely painful for very large numbers of people. To an extent which surprised me, I didn't realise, I suppose because I arrived here and I immediately mixed in kind of more literary circles, I did not appreciate the extent to which this Catholicism has such a powerful hold over people's emotions, you know, amongst well-off people. Amongst the poor, it seems less so. A lot of them have gone over to Protestant churches.
Yes, that's true.
Like in other Latin American countries, the poor feel sort of, you know, not represented by the Catholic Church.
Yes.
But anyway, that's a topic for a future show, no doubt, you know. And so, yeah, so the fear of litigation, well, the Vatican's pretty powerful, I guess. I mean, in Britain, fear of litigation is enormous. The libel laws are very strong.
It's not at all like US freedom of speech, which is a very important part of the US Constitution. I think in the Westminster countries, like the UK and Australia, there is a great fear of litigation.
That's right.
A different kind of litigation as well, reputational litigation.
That's right. Now that doesn't seem to me to be as strong in Chile, a source of self-censorship as in the UK. It's not. I mean, Chileans are generally sloppier. They're very sloppy with copyright stuff, for example. You know, you can write if you write a book, you can quote enormous chunks of somebody else's work. You can use their photographs, whatever. You still, and there's not much enforcement of copyright law, for example.
Yeah, or intellectual property is
in general. I think the same is true of the libel laws. There's not really this great culture of suing people, as far as I'm aware, for libelous. And so all that added up to great freedom of speech. You know, I often sort of think now, seeing that a certain censoriousness is arriving here from Europe, from the States, from England. You know, these fashions tend to be picked up on here, and people having to be more careful of what they say on subjects like gender, for example, or very careful indeed. You know, there's some very prickly people out there suddenly, and nobody quite knows what's happening, and you know, you suddenly realise you're offending people you didn't mean to offend, and suddenly people seem to be terribly thin-skinned. That's all coming here as well. But there was a long stretch, I think, between the end of the dictatorship and the present, when there was, I do feel there was a kind of golden age of free speech here, you know, that wasn't taken advantage of. People retained this habit of carefulness, you know, in what they said. But you could actually say anything. I mean, as a newspaper columnist, I used to write for the Mercurio, which is a kind of conservative paper.
Yes.
Traditionally, it was associated with dictatorship.
With various dictatorships, and
Right.
always with commercial interests.
That's right.
The owners are descended from Brits.
That's right. Edwards, and came over here in the 18th, 19th century.
Oh yeah, straight after independence, I think.
Yeah, early 19th. And Agustin Edwards, the owner, actively supported the dictatorship. He was actually, you know, did actually channel CIA propaganda, essentially.
Yes.
And when I arrived here, it still had this reputation as being a kind of fascist journal. And I wrote for it, expecting, and I found you could write absolutely anything. There was no censorship on political grounds, you know, at all. Again, this idea of the Mercurio as being this lying fascist organ belonged to the past.
Famous phrase, yes.
Yeah, el Mercurio miente.
It lies, yes.
That's right. It was just a hangover from the past. It wasn't like that anymore. You know, I've never. I'm probably not important enough, I think, to warrant even being read by politicians. I very much doubt anything read me, but you know, I've never been aware of any political censorship. I mean, the times I've been aware of any pressure, I wrote an article against Christianity, which was responded to with a long letter from the Council of Evangelical Churches in Chile.
And the Catholic churches?
No, just the evangelical ones. I think I was too small a fly for the Catholic Church to swat.
Well, I believe they still run the essentially the Sunday sermon in El Mercurio.
I must check.
I believe so. You know, which is read around the country and probably harmonised with.
Well, there it is. And yet I could write an article very dismissive of Christianity and you know, without any blowback at all. And the only other time I was aware of any pressure, this was more serious, was I wrote an article mocking a series of advertisements put out by a large chain store.
Oh, right. Yes.
And my excellent editor just let it go through without comment. But then there was a very strong response from the company concerned, which was a big advertiser in the newspaper. And my editor very delicately said that, you know, if I didn't mind, perhaps it might be, you know, nice if kind of perhaps I should lay off, you know, that kind of thing. But I do believe. I believe that had I written another such article, he would have let it go through as well, you know, because he's a big believer in journalistic freedom, you know. So I do feel I've had the good fortune to live through a golden age of freedom of speech here in Chile.
Well, yeah, and also it's important to take into account the rise of social media, and we'll have to talk about social media more extensively later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps we could get a young, happening person in on our conversation.
We need to find such a person, don't we? You know, to brighten us up a bit,
Yes.
to tell us what's what. Absolutely. But for the moment, I think we've said a few things about censorship and self-censorship. I hope they've been of interest, and look forward to seeing you again on Chile Talk.
Thank you.